Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are reading out of the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 405, It Might Be Lonelier. Now, this is one of Emily's great pain poems. We've used this term already a number of times. The final stanza, actually, of this poem was published as a separate poem in 1896, and it was titled Philosophy. And in some ways, we may in fact ask, to what degree is there some relationship between a poem like this and Marcus Aurelius' Meditations? And in fact, we'll probably end with some referencing to that great Stoic philosopher. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where we talked a lot about our big five in room 303. What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally that question of theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in the world? Here it will be, why must there be loneliness? I'm also hopeful that you've been working with us and you've already finished the previous 404 poems. We just finished with 404, How Many Flowers Fail in Wood. And if you have done that reading, then you can place 405 within a context, as I said, the pain poems or the suffering poems or the theodicy poems. You guys have been calling it a lot of different things. I want you to notice right away her use of the word might at the beginning. And I want to pay attention to Emily's lonely life. That is to say, as we study many of her poems, Emily will reference the fact that she does live a lonely existence. Now, some of you have pointed out the difference between being alone and being lonely. Some students at World High School, for example, have said, I can be with all these people around me and I never feel more lonely. It's not that I'm alone, it's that I'm lonely. Let's see how Emily plays the game. She says, it might be lonelier without the loneliness. I'm so accustomed to my fate, perhaps the other peace would interrupt the dark and crowd the little room too scant by cubits to contain the sacrament of him. I'm not used to hope. It might intrude upon its sweet parade, blaspheme the place, ordained to suffering. It might be easier to fail with land and sight than gain my blue peninsula to perish of delight. Now, we have often said in room 303 that we have to be careful, that we don't want to make the assumption that when the poet uses the pronoun I, that in fact the poet is speaking about himself, herself. So, for example, we can study other poets and we will often say it could possibly be a persona and not actually the poet. You'll notice that when we messed around with Walt Whitman in our talks with Walt, where we did all of the poems of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, we said the same thing that we will now say. It is instinctive for us to imagine that Emily is engaging in some kind of self-aware proclamation or disclosure. She's telling us what it's like for her to live with loneliness. But it's altogether possible that she's just taking the persona of an individual who is in fact incapable. As she says, I'm not used to hope. Now, obviously we're going to have to grapple with an earlier set of lines, 254, and we will when we get there. Notice that first of all she'll begin with might, and she'll play the game of might and then later perhaps. I can't help but gesture already to poem 696 when we get there. Acres of perhaps she will use there. It might be, she says, lonelier. Now she'll only use this word lonelier one other time, and it's in poem 532. And when we get to poem 532, she'll say it this way. I tried to think a lonelier thing than any I had seen. Some polar expiation, an omen in the bone of death's tremendous nearness. I probed retrieveless things. My duplicate to borrow, a haggard comfort springs from the belief that somewhere within the clutch of thought there dwells one other creature of heavenly love for God. I plucked at our partition as one would pry the walls between himself and horror's twin within opposing cells. I almost strove to clasp his hand, such luxury it grew, that as myself could pity him, perhaps he pitied me. Notice the use of the word perhaps. She says it might be lonelier without the loneliness. Now again, her love of comparisons are ubiquitous, and we've seen this already. She'll use loneliness a number of times. 590, we will see it again. When she gets to when we get to 777, she'll say it this way: the loneliness one dare not sound and would as soon surmise, as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size. The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. The horror not to be surveyed, but skirted in the dark with consciousness suspended in being under lock. I fear me this is loneliness, the maker of the soul, its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal. When we get to poem 903, she'll play a similar game, and it will sound like this. I hide myself within my flower, that fading from your vase, you unsuspecting feel for me almost a loneliness. And then she'll use it again, loneliness, in poem 1068. She'll use it again in poem 1116. She'll say it this way: there is another loneliness that may die without, not want of friend occasions it, or circumstance of lot, but nature sometimes thought, and whoso it befall is richer than could be revealed by mortal numeral. And then finally, she'll use loneliness again in 1133 and 1179. So clearly, this is on her mind. It might be lonelier without the loneliness. And then she'll say, why? I'm so accustomed to my fate. Now, we'll see fate again this way when my fate, the phrase in poem 966. Perhaps the other piece would interrupt the dark and crowd the little room. I told you guys about her use of the word little in 172 poems. Now, notice we're going to go from interrupt to intrude here in a little bit. Interrupt the dark, notice capitalized, and crowd the little room. Now, this is interesting because this takes us, it makes us think of obviously a nun's cloister. And of course, you can visit Emily's room there in Amherst. You can still see it. It's a small room. It's not a large room, even though it has two points of egress. It's a small room, and immediately when you walk in there, you're kind of blown away by two things: its size, and depending on the light that's coming through the windows, that room can get majestic light. Do you guys remember when we did poem 45? There's something quieter than sleep within this inner room. It wears a sprig upon its breast and will not tell its name. Some touch it and some kiss it, some chafe its idle hand. It has a simple gravity I do not understand. I would not weep if I were they. How rude in one to sop might scare the quiet fairy back to her native wood, while simple-hearted neighbors chat of the early dead, we prone to Periphasis remark that birds have fled. The idea of this little room, I don't want to interrupt the darkness of this little room. Notice crowding the little room, too scant by cubits to contain the sacrament of him. Now, the theological language is obvious here. And who is the him? Are we talking about deity, or are we talking about some possible lover? She says, I am not used to hope. Now, the problem, of course, with her use of this word is poem 254. You will remember, well, let's just enjoy it one more time because it's such a beautiful poem, and we worked through it already. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale was heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. And if we are assuming that both of the identified speakers of this poem are Emily herself, here she will tell us, I'm not used to hope. It might intrude upon its sweet parade, blaspheme the place, and again we're back to theological language, ordained to suffering. You'll remember ordained from poem 34. We'll meet it again in 1405. Ordained to suffering. Now, Emily's use of this word suffering is fascinating. We'll see it in 536. We'll see it in 686. When she says it in 792, she'll say it this way. Through the straight paths of suffering, the martyrs even trod, their feet upon temptation, their faces upon God, a stately, shriven company, convulsion playing round, harmless as streaks of meteor upon a planet's bond, their faith, the everlasting troth, their expectation fair, the needle to the north degree weighed so through polar air. And then a few poems later in 799, she'll say, despair's advantage is achieved by suffering. Despair, to be assisted of reverse, one must reverse have bore. The worthiness of suffering, like the worthiness of death, is ascertained by tasting, as can no other mouth of savors make us conscious, as did ourselves partake. Affliction feels impalpable until ourselves are struck. Here, she says she is, or the room is ordained to suffering. And then she finishes. And again, these lines published alone under the title of philosophy. It might be easier, back to the opening line of it might be. It might be easier, notice not lonelier, but easier, to fail with land in sight. I mean, this is, of course, the end of Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. You'll remember that the mariner reports that when he finally sees sight, when he finally sees land, it's at that point that his ship will sink. It might be easier to fail with land in sight than gain, notice, my blue peninsula, to perish of delight. The language here seems to suggest what? Be careful what you wish for, because you might actually get it, or the things we long for are usually the things we're never going to end up getting. At 2b, the religious language I think is powerful. Is this Emily as a nun? Is this Emily as reporting to us, I've made my choice, I will give my life's energies to the poetry that I need to work with? At 3a, I said that we would mention Marcus Aurelius. I think it's significant that the great Princeton lecturer Michael Segru once made the observation that when you look at Marcus Aurelius and what his project was, he wrote those meditations not for you, not for us. He wrote them for himself. What kind of person, Segru asks, what kind of person writes only for themselves? And his answer is a very lonely person, a person without equals. And it's very possible that I think Emily is playing a very similar game, and we're witnessing it in a poem like this. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you were lonely and you felt ordained to suffering? And was there some way for that suffering to become a propedeutic, instructional? I hope so. Thank you.